Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our session on climate change. My name is John Whitty, and I'm a member of the Elders for Climate Justice team who put together this program. I live in Everett, Washington, just north of Seattle. And we decided to start our program today by taking a look at our most recent and urgent climate catastrophe. Slide.
Top one.
Previous slide. This is what climate change looks like on the West Coast. I have not personally experienced the flames. However, where I live, we are breathing in and choking on the toxic smoke. Next slide. This is a satellite photo showing the magnitude of the smoke, which is now spread to cover much of the western part of our country. The air quality in many locations here is now among the worst in the world. Next slide. This is what two West Coast governors are saying. From Gavin Newsom of California, we are in the midst of a climate emergency. This is not the world we want to leave to our kids. And according to Jay Inslee from my home state of Washington, these shouldn't be called wildfires. They should be called climate fires. Now, it's impossible to convey what it's like to be here, but I'll share a few photos just to give you some idea. Next slide. Here's an eerie midday photo taken from the Golden Gate Bridge. Next slide. And this is all that's left of Phoenix, Oregon, a small town that is just north of Ashland near the California border. Next slide. And this is what remains of a mobile home park, which was located within Ashland. If you look closely, you can see the authorities searching for some of the many individuals who remain missing. Ashland is the home to the largest concentration of MKP brothers per capita in the world. This is an emotional time for me because I have friends who live there, including one of our founders of MKP, Bill Kauf. I've visited Ashland many times and I've been to Bill's home. And frankly, I'm worried about my friends who live there and in other threatened communities. I ask you to hold all of us in your hearts as we struggle through this. Thank you. Bobcat?
Welcome. I invite you to take a deep breath, to relax your muscles, and to allow yourself to be open and present to the journey that is about to unfold. As dynamic elders and elders in training, we each bring our own unique set of gifts and challenges. No two are alike. All are needed, especially at this moment in time. Consider that each of us carries gold within us, as tiny as a flake panned from a stream, or as large as a nugget mined from the earth. Each carries value, and each makes the human community richer. Each of us is important. Each of us can make a significant difference. Welcome.
Yes, welcome, brother and sister elders and elders at heart. And thank you, Steve, for your blessing. And thank you, John, for sharing the immediacy of what this climate crisis is like for you all on the West Coast. Our hearts do go out to you. My name is Robert Ryan, and we are 3 of the 7 members of the Elders for Climate Justice. The first thing I'd like you to do, is, if you would, is to, in the chat, enter your names and where you're from, where you're located, and what degree, what kinds of things you may have already been involved in dealing with the climate crisis, some actions or some organizations or whatever that you might have been involved in at this point. What I'm going to be doing is providing you with an overview of who we are and what we'll be doing together over the next 90 minutes. ECJ emerged out of a conversation after dinner on an elder retreat in New England in 2016, in which a group of 30+ men were in a circle brainstorming what are the major issues confronting society, the country, the world, that we elders ought to be focused on and trying to make a contribution to. The climate change crisis came up as one of those issues. And 5 of us New England brothers were sanctioned and committed by the New England community to go work on this. And we've been at this since 2016. And our group was enhanced greatly by two elders who you just saw, John Whitty from the state of Washington and Steve Amon, who's a ritual elder from upstate New York. We meet every Monday morning at 11 o'clock for an hour. We are a mission-focused circle who share a passion for trying to do the best and the most we can in the time we have remaining on this planet to address and do something about this climate crisis. And we use the basic MKP principles every week, and they sustain us. We have an agenda, we focus on projects, we check in, we set stretches, we come back in the next week and we hold ourselves accountable. I think each one of the men at different times has spoken to how much this circle means to them to be able to sustain and continue our commitment to these missions that we have both individually and as a group. Next slide. This is our website, and we invite you to visit it. And we invite you, one of the things we're hoping that can happen as a result of this meeting is more connection with more elder brothers and sisters. So please, during the course of this meeting today, if you have any thoughts or ideas, put them in the chat. And if you don't have the time to do that post-meeting, please come visit our website and establish contact with us. We really look forward to sharing our passions with you. Next slide, please. So our want for today is to inform, enlighten, and inspire you to join us as dynamic elders in guiding Spaceship Earth forward to a more just, livable, and sustainable future. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, put them all up there. Yeah, so we're going to do this in two sessions. The first session is a focus on the current situation, and it is dire. Our planet is in extremis. It is in tough shape, and we don't want to kind of, sugarcoat any of that. But we want to focus on the feelings that come from up for all of us and how we deal with that, because we feel one of the things that MKP equips us to do, and is crucial in this work, is helping people get in touch with their feelings and be able to deal with them constructively. In the second session, we'll be focused on, so what can we do about it? There are a whole range of options, of actions that individuals can take and organizations that you can support that are working on this issue. Next slide, please. Okay, so in stating the current situation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the science. The science is available readily on websites, articles, and so forth. But the core issue is greenhouse gases. Namely, we're generating too many of them. Next slide, please. Yeah, essentially what the issue is we are so fortunate on our beautiful planet Earth to be the distance we are from the sun and to have the atmosphere we do. But with these extra greenhouse gases, they're getting trapped, as you can see here. The sun's rays in that atmosphere, instead of bouncing all the way back out into space, are being bounced back towards the Earth. And our Earth has been warming at an alarming rate. Primarily carbon dioxide, but methane and some other gases as well. So this greenhouse gas effect is directly correlated to the increasing temperatures of the planet. Next slide, please. Okay, so what this slide depicts are all the sources of the greenhouse gases. The carbon dioxide, it's a product of our advanced civilization. No need to go through all the history, but this goes all the way back to one of the great human advancements was the development of the internal combustion engine, which accelerated the Industrial Revolution. So that societies in Europe and the United States particularly were able to create more products, help people get things done in their day-to-day lives more effectively, and transport those products all over the world. What unfortunately didn't happen as this was going on with people paying attention to that the emissions, the exhausts that were coming out of all those different generators of burning fossil fuels were adding to that layer and adding to that greenhouse gas impact. And this wasn't surprising news. There was a Swedish scientist in 1896, Arrhenius, who won a Nobel Prize, who predicted this to happen, that the Earth would warm up. Climate scientists really came to the fore in the 50s, and then through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, more and more of the science was added that showed the deleterious effect this was having on our planet. Next slide, please. Yeah, you've probably seen this graph or something like it before, but there have been times in the history of our planet where there have been cold periods and hot periods, but nothing approaching the rapid rate in which this is occurring, and it's very, very clearly human-induced. If you look at the 1960s to 2000, the years that most of us who are together in this session have been alive, have been the greatest dramatic increase in global temperatures. Okay, next slide, please. So this is, what are the effects of all this global warming? What John just talked about, look at that, the picture, that second picture in the second column. We've been seeing these wildfires increasing for the last 15 or 20 years. The hurricanes have increased intensity because the temperatures of the oceans have increased dramatically. And those hurricanes spiral at a much faster rate. There's flooding, there's desertification. What was it, a week or two ago, it was 111 degrees in LA, 100 degrees in San Francisco, and 121 degrees in Fresno. These are unheard of kinds of temperatures to reach in the United States. There are going to be places in the world like Delhi, India, that are going to be practically uninhabitable. Next slide, please. So what are we up against? Okay, so there's the problem, and I think all of us would nod our heads and say, yeah, and Robert, hopefully you're not just here to make us feel bad and point out, how terrible things are, but we have to know what we're up against. And what we're up against, among other things, all these things are interconnected, is our addiction to fossil fuels. We have a society, and we have all personally benefited from the wonderful things that fossil fuels have provided to us, including running out the door and jumping into our cars and driving on a trip or taking an airplane trip somewhere, and so forth. And the fossil fuel industry has a particular responsibility to take on and should be held accountable, because they had their scientists, you've probably seen reference to this in Exxon in the 1970s, where their research and development division knew what was happening and told their senior management, and the senior management actively suppressed that information. And that's part of what our economy is all about. Our economy is all about corporations wanting to grow and generate more sales and more profits. And probably up until the last 5 years or so, before the tech companies took over, maybe 10 years, the fossil fuel industry were the dominant industry. Billions and billions and billions of dollars every quarter in profits. And so they had, unfortunately, a self-interest in suppressing that information and not doing things for the common good. And another unfortunate aspect of our culture and our society is that very few people and very few groups and corporations with deep pockets have way too much inordinate amount of influence. And they can buy influence, and they have done it at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal government level. I remember when I first heard about 10 years ago, that they were spending on the average about $1 million a year influencing and lobbying members of Congress and the Senate. Another part in our economy is the we need more. We have a consumer-oriented economy that makes us feel that we need, new products, new ways to make our lives better. And this is just constant generation manufacturing and production and transportation that is always generating more greenhouse gases. And then a major part of it is us, ourselves, our values, our worldviews. Our worldviews have become distorted since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And you heard Charles Eisenstein was talking about some of these things on Friday. Too much importance on wealth and material possessions. We're very individualistic, disconnected from each other and from Mother Earth, versus the kind of values of fairness and the social good for all people, a sense of being connected and interdependent, and realizing, like so many of the indigenous cultures, that we are part of nature, not over nature, which is the way we've been acting in Europe and Western economies for the last couple hundred years. And then finally, one of the things that we're up against is, now that we know how dire and how serious the problem is, it is overwhelming. It's daunting. How can I make a difference? And particularly against these forces that I've just laid out for us. And so it's really easy. You know, I was talking to, I think it was Jerry Deutsch on the phone and talking about setting this up. You know, it's tempting sometimes to think, why not just pack it in and be like the people they knew the Titanic was going down, and play the music and, you know, have a few more drinks and dance. This thing is so overwhelming that there's a tendency to just run away from it. It's going to be too hard to change, because the science is essentially giving us another 10 years to reduce fossil fuel emissions by 50%, and we need to get to net zero in fossil fuel emissions by the year 2050. Next slide, please. Okay, what I'd like you to do now is take a moment or two, close your eyes, and visualize that place in nature that has the most special significance, importance to you. Might be in the mountains, might be by the sea, might be in the desert, might be a place you visit frequently, if you've been to many times, or infrequently, or it might be in your backyard. But visualize that. Feel its importance, feel your connection to it. Now, imagine that your special place was in the millions of acres which have been destroyed in the fires on the West Coast, or in the Mississippi Delta, where thousands and thousands of acres are being lost every year, or at Standing Rock, where they want to run a pipeline through your sacred space, or in the Amazon rainforest where you live with your tribe, and on and on and on. So many sacred places that have been degraded in the world. The farmer, philosopher, poet Wendell Berry says, there are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desacred places, desecrated places. There are so many places in this world that we have abused Mother Earth. So what we have on this graphic are the three domains that we in our group focus on, and particularly are concerned about the ethical, moral, justice-related issues of this. On the lower left, all our fellow beings that are been pushed out of their natural habitats, and because of temperature changes and other things, development, lost their habitats completely. We've all seen the picture of the emaciated polar bear on an ice floe in the Arctic Ocean. Well, the estimate is there are 100 to 200 species going extinct every day, and that's 1,000 times the normal rate. Climate injustice at the top of the triangle here is all about, it is the people who contribute the least amount of greenhouse gases are on the front lines and getting hit first and hardest by this. Just think of all the people, mostly in the global south, non-white skinned people in Central America and Africa and Asia, living at very, very poor levels, but it's their places. They are going to be and on their way to being climate migrants already. The estimate is, if we keep going on the path we're going, that in 20 to 30 years, there'll be 10 million migrants coming in Bangladesh alone when their monsoon seasons rise the earth even more. And then the final group that we have special affinity for are youth, young people. Look at the world that they're getting born into. And they're asking, rightly, how could you do this to us? How could you leave this mess for us to have to deal with? We have been fortunate enough to grow up in this area of rapid economic growth. And look what we're leaving behind for young people. You're going to see a young person shortly kind of give her truth to power conversation about this. And it's a reason that we as elders believe that we should form allyships with all these groups, but particularly with youth. Those of us who are in communities where we can help the young people who are trying to do something about addressing the climate crisis. Next slide. Okay, I mentioned that there would be a youth voice to talk to us. She's talking here last year at the UN Climate Summit. And if you remember, because of her extreme conviction of not wanting to contribute to fossil fuels, she asked around and found somebody was coming over in a sailboat. It was a pretty fancy sailboat, but anyway, she made it over and back without burning up any fossil fuels. That's this young woman's commitment. 17-year-old Swedish girl who went on strike 2 years ago by herself, holding a placard outside the Swedish parliament. And from that time, she has just been this powerful, this little body and this enormous conviction and voice speaking truth to power. So what we're going to do now is run a relatively short clip, 4 minutes, of her address at the UN last year. And after that video is over, my elder climate brother, Steve Simmer, is going to pick up and bring us into the part that we really want to get into. And that is the facing our feelings. How do we deal with all this and don't just act sad and depressed or angry or whatever it is, but actually turn that kind of energy into something constructive. So let's take it away, Greta.
Wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity and climate justice. They also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. So a 50% risk is simply not acceptable to us, we who have to live with the consequences. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. Today, that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not. Thank you.
I'd like to do something that we're familiar with in the MKP, and I think also Women Within, and that is just an accountability. The Dakota Sioux shaman, Black Elk, once said that when we walk across the earth, every step should be sacred. So let's just assume that we made this commitment, and I'd like to invite 3 of my fellow members of the Elders for Climate Justice to unmute themselves and join me in this and just talk about their personal accountability around these issues. So the first question is that the way you've lived? Have you made every step sacred?
No.
No.
So what did you do instead?
I accepted and embraced my privileged white middle-class culture. I used up and discarded Earth's valuable resources because it was comfortable and convenient.
And I didn't make it enough of a priority, clearly. I was too complacent. I remember doing a lot of little things, but not the big things that might have made a difference.
I prided myself for taking little steps like changing light bulbs and recycling while ignoring the big, important energy wastes, like unnecessary airplane trips.
What got in the way?
Well, I wanted to fit in, buy nice things, and do cool stuff in order to be accepted and admired by others.
And I had clearly other priorities. I had a job, I had a family, and I sure didn't realize how fast it was coming and how severe it was going to be. So I had a feeling that at the same time, the problem was simply too large and I could not have any real impact.
Well, I was complacent. I was comfortable living as I wanted while thinking that the real problem was too big for little me to make much of a difference. I trusted others to come up with solutions. I hoped for technological solutions. I forgot to learn to love the earth enough.
Because of the choices you made, what were the consequences to the world?
Well, the air we breathe has become terribly polluted. Because of this, countless children develop asthma and are struggling to breathe. 9 million people die each year from air pollution, 50,000 right here in the United States.
In my opinion, we are now way too far behind the curve. And no matter what we do, untold millions of people around the planet are going to suffer greatly.
Glaciers are melting. We're burning the Amazon. All beings here are threatened with extinction. Ecological and societal collapse are all too possible as we hurtle toward catastrophic tipping points.
What were the consequences to you?
Well, I'm sad that I remained unaware of what I was doing to harm the earth for so long. And I feel shame about continuing to do so even after I understood the consequences of my choices. And I'm angry that there are so many others that remain unaware or have chosen not to change their behaviors. And I'm fearful and sad for what lays ahead for my children, my grandchildren, and future generations.
And I'm feeling a lot of guilt and shame about being too complacent, about being too hopeful that somehow the problem would be solved by others.
I grieve for the losses we already see in our world. I despair for the life my grandchildren are inheriting. I know I will live out my years in shame and disgust with my species who acted so stupidly.
Let's talk about shadows. What shadows emerged in the decisions that you made?
Well, I have a shadow of greed that is never satisfied with what I have. And that part of me is selfish and blind to the needs of others.
I think a shadow I'm carrying is that I'm now 81. I think I'm not going to be around here much longer. And I'm not going to therefore feel much of the major impact of what's coming at us. At the same time, I have another shadow that, as I said before, that the problem is so large that I'm just powerless to do anything that will have a clear impact.
Well, a powerful part of me wants to throw in the towel in this existential fight and live comfortably and selfishly and leave the mess to the youngsters. Another shadow part feels powerless, inadequate, and encourages me to lay the blame on others.
So in a normal accountability, the last step is to ask if a person wants to do a simple act of service. We're not going to cover that here, but we are going to return to that because it is really the theme of our second session when we talk about what we can do. Let me see if I can turn to the next piece of this, which is to take some time to kind of do a real deep check-in about how we're doing with this issue of climate change in general. Now, let me talk about myself for starters. I want to show you a picture of my totem animal. This is the ostrich, head in the sand. A big part of me avoided for many years dealing with the issue of climate change. It was simply too much to look at directly. So the ostrich is my totem animal here. And I actually think that it's the totem animal of our entire culture. This was developed by Extinction Rebellion, this particular statue. But we actually sell the ostrich short. The ostrich does not put its head in the sand in order to avoid danger or deny reality. It's actually putting its head in the sand in order to turn the eggs, in order to warm them evenly. In other words, the ostrich is thinking about future generations. The only animal that I know that actually does put its head in the sand in order to avoid thinking of future consequences, in order to avoid thinking about the dangers of what's happening are these, the human beings. And this is also from Extinction Rebellion, Head in the Sand. Let's spend some time just trying to kind of look at the feelings that might have emerged today in you when you were considering whether you're going to attend this particular program. It might have also emerged when you were listening to Greta Thunberg, or maybe when you watched the news about what's going on in California. I just invite people here to just get a comfortable place in the chair in your room, and just invite you to close your eyes if it works, and just turn your attention within to where the feeling resides in your body around climate. And in this, the feeling may be in the pit of the stomach. You know, it's possible that it's in the throat. It may be around the heart. Everyone is different. And just take some time and just feel the place in your body where that feeling resides. And if you notice there's a part of you that doesn't want to look at this, just take note of that. If there's a voice telling you not to do it, just ask that voice if it can let you do a little exploring for a few minutes. Okay, and as you become aware of that place in your body where the feeling around climate resides, just take some time to notice the feeling. Describe it to yourself as well as you can. Is it a burning feeling, throbbing feeling, fluttering? How would you describe it? Does it have a color? Does it have a shape or a sound? And I invite you to just tell that feeling that you're going to stay here with it for a bit and just notice it and observe it. So as you tell the feeling, you're going to stay and observe it and notice it. Just get a felt sense for how that feeling responds, knowing that you're here. Just continue to stay with the feeling for a bit. A little like you might stay with a child that's fussy or sad or angry, whatever the feeling is, just stay with it. Because maybe that feeling is a little like the eggs of the ostrich that need to be noticed and turned and cared for. So having just stayed with that feeling for a bit and noticed it and turned it, I invite you to tell the feeling that you're going to go for now. Thank the feeling for letting you spend some time with it for a bit. And if it works for you, tell the feeling that you will return at some point in the future and be with it again. And wait for a response. You get a felt sense that the feeling wants you to come back to notice it again, to stay with it. Just notice whatever the reaction is. So I invite you just to say goodbye to the feeling and take a few minutes to come back into this room, the Zoom room with the rest of us. Okay, welcome back. I realize this is a challenge to do this in a room this size, and this would be a time for us to hear from people about what their experiences were, what they might have noticed. I worked for years as a psychotherapist, and my experience was that often people, when they came into therapy, they would come because of a powerful feeling they couldn't get rid of, like sadness or fear, or they were getting angry all the time. And often in the first session, the real request would be, Doc, what I want you to do is to take that feeling away. You know, it's actually causing me all kinds of problems. I don't want to be sad anymore. And they would approach me like I was a surgeon, that I would be able to simply remove the growth and take it away. The unfortunate thing was that doesn't really work very well in therapy. Joanna Macy, a Buddhist activist that many of you may know, says that when people try to avoid suffering, do like, you know, what we think the ostrich does, is just avoid suffering. That doesn't work. They end up suffering more. So the real way of handling suffering is to learn some way of staying with it, feeling it, and then continue to move forward anyway. There's a title of a book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. So if you're afraid of being on an airplane, you know, go to an airport, feel the feeling and keep moving. And I want to share with you a couple of things that I've learned to do. Everyone is different, but I'll just share kind of 4 things that I've found that's helped me keep moving forward in the midst of these powerful, paralyzing, nearly debilitating feelings. The first thing I've learned to do a bit is to welcome the feeling. And that sounds crazy, is to welcome this powerful negative feeling, whether it's rage at the fossil fuel companies or sadness or terror about what's happening and so on, to welcome it. Joanna Macy, again, says that when you feel that powerful despair or grief or whatever, that's a sign of your love. And so welcome it and thank the powerful feeling for representing the powerful love that you have for the earth, for the future, for your fellow beings. Second thing that helps me a bit here and there is Václav Havel, who's a statesman, a Czech statesman and writer, says that don't get caught in worrying about whether it's going to make a difference. When you're trying to decide on an action, decide on what's right. In other words, if I'm thinking about going to a demonstration, if I let myself get caught in, is it going to change people's minds? That's going to stop me from going. But if I simply let myself say, you know, what's a way for me to stand up for the earth? What's the next best thing that I can do to stand up for what the earth needs? Then I might go to that demonstration. Third thing that I find helps personally is sometimes the task seems so huge that I get paralyzed. So if I learn to think smaller, in other words, I'm not going to be able to stop the entire world from burning fossil fuels, but can I work in my community to encourage people to use solar panels or to use energy sources that don't depend on fossil fuels? Can I do this in my family? Can I do this in myself? I keep cutting things down, cutting them in half to the point where I can find something that's actually doable. And the final thing that I find helps me is teaming with others. And I was this kind of person I flew solo for years. Before I discovered the Mankind Project, I did it all myself. Being in Elders for Climate Justice has been a very important experience for me because we're part of a team and we can be a cell in a larger being that is more powerful than each of us individually. I can also be in a group, a compassionate group, that can help me on those weeks where I'm not able to make my stretches. They can help me look at those obstacles that I keep putting in my own way that stops me from moving forward. They can hold me in my inadequacy, and I can hold them in theirs, so that we can actually form a team and we can learn to hold one another. So anyway, those are the things that work with me. And I know if this were a larger discussion, I think we could probably shut off the mute. And I'm guessing that many of you may have many other things that you could offer as things that you've done that help you keep moving forward and turning the eggs and moving in spite of the overwhelming, paralyzing feelings that come up with this. Well, that's our program for the first part of this, and we're going to come back in after the break, and we're going to be offering a second program of answering the questions. So moving forward, what specific kinds of things can be done that actually help us move forward and do some things? And we have a team of men from Elders for Climate Justice are going to be offering some ideas for that.
This is part 2 of our 2-part presentation on the escalating climate crisis. And the focus, as has been mentioned previously, is that the question is, what can we do about it? So we are the Elders for Climate Justice. I'm Judd Laurie. As mentioned in session 1, we came together after a very lengthy discussion on a Saturday night at an elder gathering in MKP, New England in 2016. And the discussion was about basically what could we as elders do that would be of most benefit to the world as well as to our children and grandchildren. We decided that the climate crisis was that issue. We've been meeting 2 to 3 times a month on average. And among other things, we have so far created a website, a Facebook page, and a Google group. And the website, by the way, includes a lot of useful information on resources, as well as many ideas for taking action. We also conducted video interviews with a number of leading climate experts, activists, authors, leaders of climate organizations. These video interviews are also located on the website. We've made several climate change presentations at MKP New England elder gatherings. And more recently, we have begun plans to create more climate action groups like this throughout MKP USA. So an interesting byproduct of our coming together as a climate action group has been, for I think most of us, that we have also come together as a support group. We are all going through our own feelings about what's going on in the world, what's going on with the climate crisis, and having a lot of feelings like grief and rage and anger and sadness, so forth. So coming together like we have, we are able to kind of support each other and work through those feelings and help us through our dark days. So that's been very valuable, I think, for most of us. So how many of you were at session 1? Kind of raise your hands. Looks like quite a few of you. Great. The title of session 1 was Feeling Our Feelings. So for those of you who weren't there, it included an overview of how dire the climate crisis has become. We saw a very powerful and moving video of Greta Thunberg, a climate activist student from Sweden who's been inspiring people from around the world. Saw a demonstration of a project that we in the Mankind Project refer to as accountability. an opportunity that gave three of us kind of a chance to talk about how we are personally experiencing the crisis. And then finally, participation in a visualization exercise that let participants reflect deeply about the feelings they're having around the climate crisis, whatever those feelings might be. And the point of that exercise was not to cause any guilt or shame about having those feelings or to encourage you to wallow in them, but instead to acknowledge them and then turn them into constructive action. So to give you an idea of what the next session here, the next 40 minutes of this session will be about, the agenda includes a short video by Bill Mckibben titled, "What Can We Do About Climate Change?" A description of the Green New Deal and another very impressive effort called Project Drawdown, a discussion of possible actions that individuals or groups can take, and then two short closing videos. So next up is the video by Bill Mckibben. As many of you no doubt know, he's a founder of 350.org, a leading climate change activist and authority. His beginning message in the video is quite clear. You know, it's good that if we try to get rid of plastic straws and we get rid of plastic bags and we change our light bulbs, recycling, etc. But those simply aren't going to be enough to cut it. To really flatten the curve of the climate crisis, we're going to have to go after some big ticket items. And he highlights three important examples of these. So video, please.
People ask me all the time, what can I actually do to fight climate change? And it's the right question, because the problem seems so big and we seem so small that it's hard to imagine there's anything we really could do. For years, environmental groups focused on individual actions, new light bulbs, different cars. Those changes are useful. The roof of my house is covered with solar panels. I can plug my car into them. I'm glad about that. It's environmentally sound, it saves me money. But I try not to fool myself into thinking that's really how we'll solve global warming. Because by this point, with the ice caps melting, we can't make the math of climate change work one person at a time. Instead, the biggest thing an individual can do is become a little less of an individual. Join together with others to form the kind of movements that can push for changes big enough to matter. Those changes fall into three broad categories. One is to push for 100% renewable energy in every town and city. And it's a push that's really working. Diverse cities from Atlanta to San Diego, from Salt Lake to Portland, have all announced they're going to go fully renewable. In fact, when the president pulled America out of the Paris Climate Accords, he said it was because he'd been elected to govern Pittsburgh, not Paris. That afternoon, the mayor of Pittsburgh announced that his city was going 100% renewable. Second is to keep carbon in the ground. Scientists have made it clear that at least 80% of known reserves of coal and oil and gas have to stay underground if we're to have any hope of meeting the climate goals the world has agreed on. That's why we fought so hard against things like the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines, or for a moratorium on new coal mines on public land. We win a lot of these fights around the world, and every time we put up a fight, we slow down the fossil fuel industry, giving the engineers another year or two to drop the price of clean energy even further. And third, we work to staunch the flow of money to the fossil fuel industry. Our biggest tool is called divestment, convincing cities, states, universities, foundations, corporations to sell the stock they hold in fossil fuel companies. This tactic, pioneered in the fight against apartheid, really works. New studies show it has focused attention on climate change and drained companies of some of the money they need for further exploration. New York City was the latest convert, divesting its $200 billion pension fund from fossil fuels and taking the total global commitment to nearly $7 trillion. These are big goals. We can only accomplish them through movements. That's why we join together, all around the country and all across the planet.
So wise words from a wise man. And with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Lance Poya for the next part of the agenda. Lance?
Thank you, Judd. Good afternoon, elders. My name is Lance Polya, and I'm going to lead you through 3 informational slides and 2 exercises that hopefully will encourage you to reflect on what actions you can take to help combat climate change. In the video you just saw, Bill Mckibben has made some very powerful suggestions for us to act on climate change. What is your response to what he just heard, what you have just heard? For instance, if you were in front of a legislative body like your town council, what would you say to convince your council to adopt one or more of these 3 policies that Mckibben advocates? I'm just repeating what he already said. One is 100% renewable energy everywhere. Second was keep carbon in the ground. The third was divest from fossil fuels. I urge you to be persuasive, be creative, and be heartfelt. I'd like to see some more of your responses from chat. Okay. Public transportation instead of using the automobile. Pass building codes for local construction. Limit driving lines for cycling. I want my taxes to be useful. Renewable energy is not such a difficult thing to achieve. It's only our attitudes that are hard to adopt. Creating solar and wind energy bases will provide jobs and help the environment. Environmental programs in schools starting with the very young. Community gardens everywhere. Good. Give examples of how my city is being impacted right now. Ask them to work on a plan of action related to transportation to cut down driving to the city. Tell them I will look for replacements if I don't see action soon. Continuing with the theme of what you can do to fight climate change, we'd like to introduce you to Project Drawdown. Project Drawdown is a nonprofit organization that helps us reach drawdown, which is the future point in time when levels of greenhouse gases stop climbing and start to steadily decline. If you attended our first session, you learned about greenhouse gases that trap heat in the atmosphere. Why is this so dangerous? Our heated atmosphere disrupts the flow of the jet stream, which creates our weather patterns. This altered jet stream leads to the prolonged droughts that are causing the devastating fires ravaging our west coast. Our heated atmosphere also warms the ocean, causing horrendous hurricanes destroying the Gulf Coast. Even here in New England, the altered weather patterns are causing excessive dryness, increasing the chance of forest fires. Project Drawdown has emerged as a leading source of information about ways folks like us can reduce greenhouse gases that warm the atmosphere. They have evaluated 100 actions that you can take to reduce CO2 and other greenhouse gases. A link to these actions can be found on our website. Project Drawdown has ranked these 100 actions by their effectiveness. This slide lists 6 out of the 10 most 100 effective actions that you can take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Let me briefly describe each one. Reducing food waste. A whopping 1/3 of the food we raise does not make it from our farms to our fork. Amazing, isn't it? What we don't eat decomposes and releases huge amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere. So we'll hope that you'll try not to buy more food than you need to, and not to try to put more food on your plate than you can eat. The second one is called adopt a plant-rich diet. Did you know that raising livestock creates a large amount of greenhouse gases? So if you eat less meat, you'll bring that number down. I've been a vegetarian for over 30 years now. Third, educate girls and reduce family size. We know that women who are educated have fewer children. Since every newborn child will create new greenhouse gases, if we encourage our families to eat less, to have less children, then we will substantially lower how much emissions we can create. The fourth one, join a solar farm or install solar panels. At present, solar electricity still contributes to a very tiny percentage of all the electricity generated in the world. But if you join a solar farm or own solar panels like I do, you will increase electricity made from the sun. And this will reduce our demand for carbon-emitting fuels, fossil fuels. The fifth one, regenerative agriculture. This means that we can revitalize our farms and our gardens by improving soil health and reducing fertilizer use. This will make our crops healthier so they can absorb more carbon from the atmosphere. And eating locally saves on using fossil fuels for transporting food from far away. The sixth one is this big word, afforestation, but it simply means that we need to plant more trees in our own backyards and in public areas, because every new tree that we plant will absorb some CO2 from our atmosphere. Some of these 6 practices may apply to you and members of your family. So here's our second exercise. How will you carry out these 6 actions? Remember, for up to 3 minutes, any of these actions you can put in practice will have a powerful impact on reducing greenhouse gases. Put on your thinking caps and go for it. Share if you like for the chat, and I'll read aloud some of your ideas. Go for it. Plant trees is one answer. Did all of them already? Educate the extended family regarding housing investments. I started eating meat on the weekends about 10 years ago and have gradually cut down to almost none. Good. Have more suitable outside classes to learn about growing and taking care of plants in our vegetable gardens. We do meat consumption, okay? Other actions you can take to combat climate change come from the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is a bold transformation of our national priorities that aims to address climate change and economic and social inequality. The name refers back to the New Deal, a set of reforms and public work projects undertaken by President Franklin Roosevelt in the 40s in response to the Great Depression. Next slide, please. The Green New Deal falls into 3 major themes: environmental, economic, and social, which I've listed on this slide. The first one is restoring our environment. That's to meet 100% of our power demand through clean, renewable, and zero emission energy sources. This will finally end the greed of the fossil fuel industry and hold them accountable for misleading us about the dangers of coal and gas. And the Green New Deal will also allow the United States to rejoin the Paris Agreement and reassert its leadership in the global fight against climate change. Finally, great. The second part of the Green New Deal, the second theme, is called economic recovery, moving from an economy built on exploitation and fossil fuels to one driven by dignified work. Part of this recovery will provide $200 billion to the Green Climate Fund to make all this happen. And it will provide for better housing, economic security, and access to clean air, clean water, and healthy and affordable food. The third part of the Green New Deal is called the social justice theme. And that means we'll ensure justice for frontline communities, specifically people of color, people with disabilities, children, and the elderly. We hope this gives you a very basic overview of the Green New Deal. This very complex and comprehensive piece of legislation has been introduced to both houses of Congress, but unfortunately has not passed either yet. Thank you for your attention and participation. I'm now going to turn this presentation over to John Whitty.
Thanks, Lance. Well, our presentation today has been basically just an introduction to climate change. We've really just scratched the surface. We're hopeful, however, that many of you will choose to go a bit deeper and take the next step. With that in mind, I'd like to offer you some tools and resources that you can use to learn even more, to get involved, to take action, and to make a difference. Let's start by going to our website, Elders for Climate Justice. What you see first is our banner statement in response to the George Floyd killing and systemic racism. We put this front and center as a reminder that climate change is very deeply tied to racial, social, and economic injustice. Well, let's go to the links page now. Here you'll find all sorts of resources, including links to various organizations, as well as educational articles and videos. My intention here is not to overwhelm you with a lot of information. Right now, I'd like you to just get a feel for our website and how you might use it. Let's go to the organizations list. Most of these groups are national and international organizations. However, many of them have local chapters scattered throughout the country where you can actually get personally involved. And by scrolling through this list, it's likely that you can find at least one or two that fit your particular interests and passions around climate change. For example, if you're interested in climate change policy, you might want to work on pushing legislation through Congress. If you want to do that, check out Citizens Climate Lobby. If you want to increase your knowledge about climate change, or perhaps might want to give presentations to others, even if it's only your friends and family, consider checking out the Climate Reality Project. They offer informative and engaging online training several times per year. Now, if you're interested in the health impacts and social inequity of climate change, you might look into Physicians for Social Responsibility, which is a group that I've been a member of for many years. And by the way, you don't have to be a physician or even a healthcare professional to be part of that organization. If your interests are drawn towards the youth climate movement and would like to take a supporting role in helping them, the Sunrise Movement may be just the group for you. And they actively promote the Green New Deal, and they have a whole bunch of information about that on their website. Now, if you're more into rabble-rousing and don't shy away from nonviolent demonstrations and even civil disobedience, then you might want to check out Extinction Rebellion. But regardless of what your interests and passions are around climate change, it's quite likely that you can find a group that would be a good fit for you. So check them out. Now, below the organizations list, you'll find links to articles, many great articles and videos that are both interesting and informative. So you might want to check those out as well. And the next page on our website is entitled Taking Action. And this page contains additional links to resources and organizations where you can find opportunities to take action and to make a difference. So when you get a chance, I invite you to go back to our website and look it over. And here's our address. We'll go back to the slides. Well, the address is eldersclimatejustice.org. So what I want to show you next is that since I mentioned that we are just barely scratching the surface with this presentation, what our hope is that you'll have some interest in pursuing this. And one of the things that we might do as our Elders for Climate Justice group is to offer some follow-up presentations. And if there's a sufficient interest, we can do these at a later date. And I was hoping to show you some of the things we've been thinking about. Number one would be Climate Change 101, which would examine the science of climate change in more detail, the impacts that it caused, and also go into detail with many of the various solutions that are at hand. So number two would be examine the ecological impacts and take a deeper dive into the multiple ecological consequences of climate change. Number three would be examining the health impacts and social inequity. And this would go into more detail about the multiple health impacts caused by climate change, and also emphasize the close link between climate change and the social and economic injustice. Number four would be becoming involved and taking action. And this would take a deeper dive into the various solutions that are available to fight climate change and the actions that you can take to bring this about. And lastly, number five would be how to form a mission-focused climate circle. And we would describe in a bit more detail what our group is all about, how we formed, how we're structured, and what we do. And the intention here is to offer our experience and perhaps some insight to anyone thinking about starting their own group. And we would be willing to offer some hands-on support to help you get your group up and running. So please enter, if you're interested in any of those, please enter that in the chat box along with any other comments. This would be helpful to us as we decide where to focus our time and energy going forward. So thank you, and with that, I'll turn things back over to Lance.
We're now going to treat to an eloquent and powerful poem called We the People. It's about the personal impact of climate change on one person, the poet Sophie Dorman. Sophie is a senior at a local high school here in Vermont. I first met Sophie when she recited this poem at a Vermont Sierra Club annual meeting. The audience was deeply touched by it. We subsequently read this poem to our Elders for Climate Justice group, who felt similarly. Now it is our pleasure to share Sophie's beautiful poem with you.
And I'm tired of this fight of climate and corporations, oil and overheating, melting and methane, of people who care scrapping at the outskirts of climate power. I'm 16 and like to cross-country ski in the woods behind my house. But when I'm 36 and I want to hike in the woods with my kids, I'm afraid there won't be any trees. When I want to teach them to ski, I'm afraid there won't be any snow. And when I want to teach them to protect this earth, I'm afraid there will be nothing left to save. I can't hurtle through time and guarantee those human rights will exist 20 years from now. I can't grab the world with an outstretched arm and paint it green again. I'm 16, with ample years ahead of me, with ample passions and ideas burning in my chest. But I don't have a US flag pinned to my suit jacket. I don't have an oil company under my name. And I don't have the power to force a better future upon us all. So, I chip off the power-plastered wall one flake at a time. I lay the seeds for my future in the small actions of today. We make choices. Everything we do holds an opportunity to give back to the land that has given us our pass of life. Every action, every word tells a story of the individual struggling to create change within their own little world. Each little world touches a million other worlds in each lifetime. And so I believe a movement can sprout, lasting change can take root, the caring unite on a quest to save the planet. And so I stand in the cafeteria on the first day of school and tell people whose names I don't even know, the wax paper is actually compostable. I show up with sticky notes in a color-coded planner coded in last night's climate project ideas. I'm 16 and I write poetry. I lead meetings. I raise my voice, even if I'm uncomfortable, even if people are shouting over me or no one is listening, for the earth cannot speak for itself. I'm 16 and this is my world, not just today, not just tomorrow, but for a lifetime. And this is your world too. I challenge you all to step up and change it. We, the people of the United States of America, are angry. Demand justice, demand peace, demand the action our planet deserves. We, the people of the climate movement, are taking the earth back. I'm 16 and I raise my voice for the future, and I invite you to join me.
Thank you, Sophie, for sharing this most powerful poem with us. We hope it has touched you as much as it has touched us. I turn the session now back to Judd Laurie, who will introduce you to the next video and deliver some parting thoughts.
The video is Hieroglyphic Stairway. And it's a piece by poet and activist Drew Dellinger.
Won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, and birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? I'm riding home on the Coma train. I've got the voice of the Milky Way in my dreams. I have Teams of scientists feeding me data daily and pleading I immediately turn it into poetry. I want just this consciousness reached by people in range of secret frequencies contained in my speech. I am the desirous earth, equidistant to the underworld and the flesh of the stars. I am everything already lost. The moment the universe turns transparent and all the light shoots through the cosmos, I use words to instigate silence. I'm a hieroglyphic stairway in a buried Mayan city, suddenly exposed by a hurricane, a satellite circling Earth, finding dinosaur bones in the Gobi Desert. I am telescopes that see back in time. I am the precession of the equinoxes, the magnetism of the spiraling sea. I'm riding home on the Colma train, with the voice of the Milky Way in my dreams. I am myths where violets blossom from blood like dying and rising gods. I'm the boundary of time, soul encountering soul, and tongues of fire. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I can't sleep because my great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the earth was unraveling?
Yes, what did you do when you knew? As Greta Thunberg has said, act as if your house is on fire, because it is. Many thanks to all of you for for joining us, for tuning in. We'll close with a blessing by Steve Amon, also known as Bobcat.
So I've been really fortunate to have some awesome mentors, both within and outside of MKP. And one of the really important lessons that I've learned is, as an elder, how important it is to see people on their journey, to witness what is happening for them. And it's especially important for younger people. But I think oftentimes the elders kind of get left out of those kind of blessings. So I want to take a moment and acknowledge all of you, acknowledge and honor the fact that you have invested time and energy in being here for the last 3 days and for this last 2 45-minute sessions on this climate justice presentation. You make a difference. I want you to know that we see you, that we're witnessing your journey, and that what you do is important. The gold that lies within you matters a lot. Blessings to all.